Yeah.
Good. I like actually, and yeah, it's important to let everyone feel safe.
All right. I am Grant. I'm an alcoholic. A little housekeeping before I really get rolling. My sobriety date is November 18th of 2021. I have a sponsor, knows he's my sponsor. I sponsor other men in the program. And I'm happy to be here with you all today. I hope I can spend the rest of my life sober. That'd be sweet. But let's see. I was born here in Missoula in the year 2000. So I'm just a pup, but I had this really, I would call it like an idyllic existence for quite some time. This very kind of like rambly, campy, kind of hippie parents' existence where it was like they'd take me out of school when I was in elementary school and we'd go camping for like a month. And my dad was like washing windows and fishing guiding and be like, come on, get in the truck, boys. And we're like, fuck yeah, dad, that'd be sweet. And that kind of continued for some time where it was just me, my brother, and my parents. And it felt like this very established and really like loving home, which I'm extremely, extremely lucky and grateful to have had. And that continued for 10 or 12 years of just like camping and being this very kind of isolated but beautiful family unit, and that just kept going, and I'm so grateful for that. Around the time I was 11 or 12, my older brother, who was also one of us, he was a year and a half older than me, and we were like yes growing up, where it's just like running around in the woods and by the rivers in Montana, like hitting each other with sticks and climbing trees and doing all the kind of like the typical Montana rugrat stuff. He started using around the time I was like 9 or 10, something like that. And then there was this kind of slow creep of a shift in my life where all of a sudden, like this really like bright and light family dynamic kind of started to get a little bit darker. Um, Along somewhere around there, I had my first drink. I was like, yeah, 9 or 10 years old, and my grandma, who's definitely an alcoholic, but won't say she is, still kicking, 90 years old. But she flew over, and she would always bring like airplane bottles of scotch with her. And my 10-year-old self was like, it's time to try this shit out. This must be great. So I had like a Sunny D, and I poured like some shooters of scotch into the Sunny D, and I pounded it, and then like fell asleep in the treehouse or something like that. And I didn't use again for I don't know a year and a half, something like that. And oh, I drugs are part of my story. This is a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, so I'm always going to say alcohol, but there's a good chance I was using drugs when I say alcohol as well. I did drink a ton, but that's also part of my story. But my older brother, I remembered this is like really when I like got off to the races when I was like 11. He came into the backyard and he was like, hey, try this. And I was like, sweet, I trust you. Absolutely. You do this, I do this. This is how it's always been. Um, and I did, and I was like, whoa, this is next level. I'm off in fairyland. Like everything's bright and I can like laugh more and I can feel more. I remember that feeling of just like I can feel so much more. Um, and then that kind of continued like that. My brother got into harder and harder things, and um I like kind of did too, but I was also kind of just like a little hippie kid where I was you know doing hippie drugs and drinking and whatever. And he started getting caught by my parents, and that's when like this first schism in my little like perfect family circle started happening. And all of a sudden it was like yelling at night and fights and like running out the house and physical confrontations and things like that. And it was really I didn't know what the hell was going on because I was like 12 years old, and all of a sudden it was this existence that I had known for years and years and years just like kind of blew apart seemingly overnight. Um, and I kind of just like started to retreat into myself, and I started having some mental health symptoms, as I think a lot of like early teenagers do. But kind of exacerbated, I think, by what was happening at home. Um, and then, it kind of my older my older brother's thing went like the logical progression of how things go, where it's like, okay, sticking you into an institution, sweet. So he went off for like 6 months or something, and it was just me in the house, and it got really lonely there for a while because I was really depressed, and I was drinking a lot, and it was kind of like a very much like alone in my room, stopped talking to people at school, got really sad. Um, and I started to feel this anxiety, like just in the depth of my soul, where it's just like this pit of dread, where it's like, when's the next thing gonna happen? When's the next thing gonna happen? When's the next thing gonna happen? And that's stopped now, but it continued for 10 years or so. Um, Somewhere along the lines, I started using a lot more. It's a progressive illness. I used more and more and more. And by the time I was 16, I could pretty confidently say that like I could not imagine going a minute of a day without using or drinking. Um, and then uh in the midst of this, my brother's, coming home from rehab, getting arrested, going to juvie, this, that, and the other. And somehow I'm flying under the radar, but I was just really always really quiet and really isolated because I think like my addiction knew and I knew that the best way for me to keep doing what I was doing was just to like lay low and get after it on my own. Um, so that's what I did. Um, and then fast forward, I don't know, a year or two. Um, I dropped out of high school my junior year, um, and then moved out of my parents' house. And I lived with my like 23-year-old girlfriend at the time, which like looking back on that, I'm like, what the fuck were you thinking? Me and her. I'm like, I don't know, that's shady, dude. Um, and I lived in like, government subsidized housing, like the white building across the Higgins Street Bridge. It was like $500 a month. And I was working at Warden's, like making sandwiches or doing whatever. And I was like, this is great. I'm a full grown adult. I don't know how to cook. Like, I don't, what are taxes? Um, and that was sweet because then it was like, oh, I don't have to hide from anybody anymore. And so just like sit in my just little tiny apartment and get floored all the time. And then I would be super messed up at work too, and then really kicked off. And then um I proposed to that girl with a ring pop when I was like 17, and she said yes. And then like a week later, I was like, I can't do this. This is crazy. And so I took all the money that I'd saved and I was like, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna run away to South America. And I ended up in Chile for like 4 months on this kind of like, weirdly enough, I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was God or what, but I was able to have these periods of sobriety while I was there, and I would spend a lot of time in the mountains backpacking, kind of doing what I did when I grew up, where I could kind of like, looking back, that was when I felt like the first glimpses of a higher power for myself. Because it's like I'd be clear-headed-ish. I was still totally mentally deranged, but like I wasn't messed up. And I would sit there and I would look at these like beautiful vistas and whatever, and I would feel something that wasn't me. And looking back, I can notice that. And at the time, I was just like, that's just a beautiful view that makes me feel like crying, you know? And then I would go back into whatever town and I would get super wasted for like 4 days. And then I would go back out, and there was these intermittent periods. And then eventually I ran out of money, came home, obviously didn't get married. Um, thank God. And then at that point, I'm like almost 18. I was like, you know what do 18-year-olds do? We go to college. And so I went to school. I went to school in Arizona, at this little tiny liberal arts hippie school. Um, and I went there and realized that college was not only a great place to drink and use, but I also nobody told you that you needed to go to class. So I was like, I could have just moved, right, and not had any debt, but I just decided I wanted to get super messed up instead. I was like, this is a great excuse. And I'm like, looking back, I'm like, you have $10,000 of college debt from that, man? Come on. And so I started there. I started that was like my first big like downward spiral where it was like panic attacks every day. Couldn't leave my apartment because I was like, oh, there's like creatures outside and somebody's out to get me. I don't know who, but they're out there. Um, and I I have this like distinct memory of being in my apartment and being like, I need to stop. Um, and I didn't realize that you could have serious health complications from withdrawals. Um, so I was coming off booze, alone in my apartment, and I had a seizure and did all the normal stuff. Obviously, I'm here, so everything worked out. But um, I, after I was fully kind of dried out and kind of just like a shell, I just remember like walking out into the sunlight, and it was the first time I've been sober for a couple days. I think it was like it took me like 3 days to really get through the worst of it. And I walked out into the sunlight and I just remember feeling so defeated. I felt so defeated and I felt so tired. And I was just so, I remember that feeling of being so done. And that's the first time that happened. There were a few more after that. But um, I'm exceptionally lucky to have parents who are in Al-Anon and who have been since I was 13, something like that. So I remember I called my dad and I was like, I'm an alcoholic, I'm a drug addict, I don't know what to do. And he was like, do you want to go to treatment? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. That sounds like the right thing to do. That's what you do when you're a drug addict. Um, and so I went to treatment. I was 18 years old. I went to treatment in Minnesota. I stayed sober for like 6 months. Didn't really do the program. I was like, I'm dried out. I feel great. It was still totally crazy. Um, did a lot of like, I would go to meetings and I was like, it's time to 13th step. There's a lot of pretty young people in recovery. This is sick. Um, and that was kind of how AA went for me at the time, which was not at all. I didn't do it. And I relapsed in Minnesota. Got into a super codependent relationship with a girl who was from Oregon. She said, I'm moving back to Oregon. I was like, great. Fucking love Oregon. I'll move to Oregon. And moved to Oregon, small town called Ashland, way down in Southern Oregon. Um, and COVID happened, and I was like, sweet, all the young people are getting really drunk right now, and a lot of people are getting really drunk right now because that's nobody knows what's going on. We all think we might die. So for like 2 or 3 months there, I was in hog heaven because it's like nobody was questioning my drinking, nobody was wondering why I was drinking in the morning. It was like there was nothing else to do at the very start of COVID. Um, I mean, there was tons of other stuff to do. Obviously, there was nothing else for me to do, and everybody around me was also getting hammered at 9 in the morning. Um, and then things started to level out a bit. I'm still in this super codependent relationship. People started to go back to work and go back to school and do all these things, and I was like, "But guys, we had a great thing going. Let's keep it up." Um, and then, uh, so that ended out probably about how you expect like a codependent relationship. One of us is super alcoholic, stayed together for like 2 years, did all the did all the things, did all the cheating, lying, stealing, uh, just a just a real wholesale trampling of all my morals and values that I hold dear. And I'd been doing that for a while, but that was like the first time that I'd had an intimate enough relationship with somebody that I could really see the hurt on somebody's face every morning that I could cause with my drinking and with my use. Um, and so, oh yeah, like I think in in 2021, my older brother passed away from this disease. And it was one of those things for me where, and I'm not ashamed to admit this anymore because I know what I am and I know I'm an alcoholic and I know this is what we do. But I remember sitting with my parents and just thinking to myself, like, nobody could blame me for drinking about this. That was my first thought, right? Like, nobody could blame me if I totally went off the rails. And when I first got sober this time around, I used to feel a lot of shame about that. And then I was just like, I realized that that's what we do. We're alcoholics. And I was like, this is obviously like probably the worst. Yeah, definitely the worst thing that's happened to me, but it's the perfect excuse to get as drunk as possible for as long as I can. And I proceeded to do that. And I was using other drugs at the time. I went to rehab a couple more times, detox like 6 or 7 more times in this, I think, like 7 month long period where I was inching closer and closer to death. And each time it was just like into detox. And then I would make it 2 days and then I would get hammered again. And then I would start using drugs. And then it was just this. And then I was like, I know what I need to do. I need to move back to Missoula. I'm going to be around my family again. I'm going to get cleaned up. Came back here, didn't change anything else about my life, continued to do the exact same thing, ended up in St. Pat's like 3 times in 2 weeks or something like that, ODing. Um, and then on the last one, Missoula's the type of town where like your parents, if you grew up here, your parents know everybody, including ER doctors. And it's like definitely breaking patient confidentiality or whatever, but I'm really glad this doctor did because the last time I like woke up from an overdose and my dad was sitting beside me and like that's the last thing you want to see after you OD is your dad, dude. I was like, oh man, come on. Um, and I looked over at him and I was like, oh dude, it's done. And he was like, do you feel like you're done? And that's all he asked me. He didn't say you need to stop. He didn't do any of those things. I was like, and all I could say was, I really, really want to be. Because I did. I really wanted to be. And he said, well, what do you want to do about it? And I said, I want to go back to treatment because you can, like, I know plenty of people who have gotten sober without treatment. Um, and that's amazing. But that, like, that little bit of a break is something that I'm exceptionally grateful for because it's like I got a month of sobriety. I got through the really hard parts somewhere where I couldn't leave, or I could, but it's a lot harder to leave. You have to do paperwork, so it's like, why would you even bother? Um, and so I did another month in treatment, in Minnesota, and I came out. Um, and I remember it was like the first time where I was like, I will do anything to not go back to that because I'd finally reached that like degradation of like my mind, my body, and my soul too, where I was like, I have wholesale trampled over myself and my morals and other people in pursuit of what, right? At the end of the day, in pursuit of a life that's unfulfilling, that makes me consider suicide every single day. Um, that I was thinking about it and it was like, what what's it all for? What's the point? Like, I've done all this for something I don't even want, you know? And so I went to treatment, got out, and I was living in this like halfway house. Um, that was like sinking into the ground in St. Paul, Minnesota, and it was like so cold, like Midwest cold, where it was like -40 and the wind was whipping, and I was like, oh man, this shit is bleak, dude. It was that kind of like special type of loneliness when you first get sober and you haven't really made friends yet. And I was like, and I remembered that I had, when I first lived there, I had this job selling like fine cheese to people. And this dude I worked with was sober. And we had like a rapport in the way that we would laugh and joke at work. And I remembered looking back, like he had always, one of the first things he asked me when he looked at me was, "Are you friends with Bill?" Because he could tell I was an alcoholic, and I was like, "Yeah," and I was drinking at the time and whatever. But at that point, I remembered him, and I had his phone number, and I called him, um, and I was like, "Hey, I'm in the Twin Cities, yada da da da. I think I need a sponsor. I don't know what I'm doing at all." And he said, "I'll sponsor you," and I was like, "Great, perfect." Because I was finally willing to do whatever. I was like the first person who said, "I'll sponsor you." I was like, "Sick. If you can help me, I will do whatever you ask me to do." And we met at a coffee shop, and this was still kind of COVID-ish, so you had to like meet in like the outdoor pavilion with the heat lamps on and stuff, and it was like really cold, and we were both freezing. And he took me through the first three steps like right then and there. And each question he asked was like, "Do you think you're an alcoholic and that your life's becoming unmanageable?" And I like, my toes were numb, and I was in Minnesota and I didn't really know how I'd gotten there. I was like, "Yeah, dude, absolutely." And he's like, "Of course." Um, and then we went through everything with like the two and three, which are about God. And those are the ones I've always had a problem with, because I was like, oh man, like if I can do this alone. I can do this alone. And then at that moment, at that time, I was like, yeah, I do believe that something outside of myself can help me. And I do, and I am willing to give myself over to that thing. Um, and I meant it. I did. That time I meant it. And I guess now we're in the kind of what happened part of things, but I started to go to meetings. I had a sponsor. My sponsor got me through the steps, and like it was it was really fast. It was like 2 weeks or something like that, where we were meeting 3 times a week for 2 weeks, and we just reamed the steps. And he did not let me like procrastinate on my fourth step, and I was still kind of stunned. And when I came in, I could barely talk. So it's like all I was doing was what people told me to do, which was perfect. That was what I needed at the time. And I probably still need that to a certain extent. But um we I did my fourth step, I did my inventory, and I had like fake done an inventory before where I had started it and then decided that that seemed like a lot of work and I didn't really want to be that vulnerable with another man. So stopped. And but I like really put pen to paper, and it was like it didn't like fill up a whole notebook or anything, but for me, it was a lot. It was pages on pages, and it took about, I don't know, it took 5 or 6 hours of sitting in my sponsor's apartment, um, to read the whole thing and to go over the whole thing and to talk about the causes of everything. And what was really hard for me was looking at my part in everything, and especially with things with my brother, as it turned out, because I was like, I didn't play any part of that. And I realized that I had not only enabled my older brother, but I had, in a certain sense, like encouraged that behavior because I was down. I was there every step of the way. Um, but I finished reading that. I finished my fifth step, and I remember being so stoked because I didn't cry. Right? I didn't cry. And then I got back in my car to go back to the sober house. And I bawled my fucking eyes out for like 15, 20 minutes. And then I went to my home group immediately afterward. And then I came home, and I had been having a really hard time grieving the loss of my older brother because I was drunk for like the first 7, 8 months that he had passed away. And I remember I got home that night and I sat down in the shower because I was doing really well. And and I remember it was the same day I finished my fifth step, and I'd just been to my home group, and I had I never thought I was gonna have like a white light moment, like this moment where I knew God was with me. Um, and I was like sitting down in the shower, and I just had this like instantaneous, kind of hard to describe, but like this warm feeling that I suddenly knew for a fact that my older brother was with my higher power, right? And what a beautiful place to be, because my higher power is like warmth and love and light and nature and connection between human beings. Like all these things he did not get to have in life, he had now. And I also had this thought, because I was angry too. I was so mad. And all of a sudden that was gone. All the anger was gone because I realized that like if he's with God, then he gets to take care of me like he didn't get to, right? And what a gift. Um, like what a gift. And I just remember it was right after my fifth step, and this massive weight lifted off of me, and it hasn't come back, right? Um, and I I got super emotional talking about that. I always do though. That's okay. But I was just like moving through all that, and that was like the first instance where God did for me what I could not do for myself, because I could not move through that. I couldn't. I just could not move through that. I didn't know how. There's no like playbook for grief, and there's no playbook in how to work through that, besides like people talked about like time and time and time and time, and that's remained true. It's not like I'm like over the death of my older brother or anything, but the anger was gone and the fear was gone and all those things were gone. And it's like the grief continues, but my higher power allowed me to move through it because I couldn't before that. And that really started like a wholesale cascade into me like actually having like a yearning for more of that. I wanted as much of that feeling as I could get. And I just took that and I ran with it. And I was only like 3 months sober when that happened. And then as time went on, like I was, yeah, I hit like 6 months, like half a year, which was the longest I'd ever gotten. But I was actually working the program and I was in it. Like I was surrounded by particularly this group of men my age who were like these old, to me they were old. They were like 30 years old. Um, they were, but they were younger men with like 8 to 10 years of sobriety. They had gotten sober when I got sober when I was 21. They were like close to my age, but they had years of sobriety. And like a year of sobriety was totally out of my realm of conception at that point. And they took me in and they just fucking dragged me to everything. It was like I was playing kickball and I was getting dinner after meetings and I didn't have any money, but somebody would always, somehow the bill was always paid, and like this, that, and the other. And they just dragged me around and dragged me around. And I, it kept working and I kept working the steps. And then somebody asked me to speak at a meeting when I was like 6 or 7 months sober. And I was like, I don't know if I'm the best equipped to do that. I don't know what the fuck is going on ever. Or like, it doesn't matter, right? Just share your experience and your story with others. And I did, and I felt better, and I kept taking these actions. And I was like the greeting coordinator at my home group, and I greeted every day, and I would drag some new person to do it with me every single day. And all like slowly but surely, my cravings went away. Like it went from like I would think about drinking like all the time to maybe once a week to once a month. And then by the time I hit a year, I had this like stark realization that I hadn't thought about drinking in like 3 months. It's like it was gone. Um, and it's remained that way. Like I'll have those like passing thoughts of like, man, a glass of wine sounds really tasty with dinner, but it's not like a craving. It's just like that sounds tasty, and then I'm like, that's fucking crazy. Um, what are you talking about? And that's as far as things get for me. Um, and oh God, where even was I? I'm all strangled up. Yeah, got a year of sobriety. It was amazing. And it gave me this sense of like self-worth. Because I'd never stuck anything through in my whole life. I just hadn't. Like if a problem came up, I left. I ran away. I did this. I put a chemical band-aid on it, or I started dating a new person, or I did whatever. And I had stuck with something for a year, and the amount of like I wouldn't even call it pride, but it's just like I got some self-worth back, and I started feeling like maybe I was an okay man for the first time in a really long time. And then that continued, and I started sponsoring people, and that's been like such a that's such a double-edged sword too, because it's like half the people I sponsor, probably more than half. It's like somebody will come up to me and they'll be like, "Will you sponsor me?" Whatever. I'm like, "Yeah, of course." And then we'll have that conversation. I'll never hear from them again, right? And that's just how it goes. And it's like I did that to people, so I don't know. It's like it's when I first started out, I was like, "Man, maybe I'm not doing this right or this right," and I would call my sponsor, and he would be like, "No, dude, like." You disappeared without a trace how many times? It's like a lot. Yeah, quite a lot. Um, and I just like kept going, and eventually I had like another what I realize now is a God moment is I was speaking at a dual diagnosis mental health and addiction ward in Minneapolis and St. Paul for teenagers. And this like I saw this kid there and I did my little, whatever, I'm Grant, I'm an alcoholic. Here's 10 minutes of my experience with both mental health and addiction. And I saw that kid 2 weeks later. It was like around Halloween. I had gone out dancing because that was something I did. It was like I could go out with like 30 other sober people and go dancing. Like, holy shit, that's so cool. Um, and I saw that kid on the street smoking a cigarette looking so lost. So lost. That same kid. And it's like a city of a million people. So the odds of that are like relatively slim. And so I walked up and we talked and whatever. And he could barely talk. And so I was like, "Do you want to do the thing? Do you want to sponsor?" And he was like, "Yeah." And we worked together for until I moved. Um, so I got to watch this 18-year-old go from where I was at, which was like not able to talk, super socially anxious, not be able to like meet people and look them in the eyes, to like this really just vibrant soul who was like caring and kind and committed and like kept doing the thing and had a service commitment and railed against it, but did it anyway. And like all the things that I did and all I had to do was exactly what my sponsor did to me. And that's like the beauty of the whole thing for me is like however many years back, like my sponsored in like the, prehistoric age, around Bill W, kick kick the shit off and it all just got passed down and down and down to me. And then I got to pass it to somebody else. And we're all doing that with each other. And that's like the whole beauty of the thing. But now I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but got over got a second year of sobriety. That was really cool. And then um I've been working like random jobs, random I was like working in restaurants and then I was climbing trees with chainsaws and I was an arborist and I fell out of a tree and broke half my body and then I remember like laying on the ground after that and being like, I need to do anything else. And so I decided I was going to come back to school in Montana and spend time with my family. So I came back here um 10 months ago. Yeah, 10 months ago, something like that, almost a year. And um that has been this has been the most unexpected kind of gift of all is I get to spend time with my mom and dad and show up as like a man that I can be proud of and a man who has done the work and a man who has moved through grief and has had some life experience. some life experience where I'm trying my best to do whatever. And then I went away and I did some healing. And this whole time they were doing some healing. And now we get to come back together and I get to have these conversations with the people I love most in the world that I never would have had, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago. And like we get to talk about the death of my brother, and it's not like this like closed subject. It's like something we can talk about and move through our feelings of grief as a family. And about a year ago, I flew back and we spread his ashes in the river up at Rock Creek. Um, and I remember it's like I said a prayer, and my dad said a prayer, and my mom said a prayer. And what could have been this really like fuck deal turned into this really beautiful experience for my family, where it's like we were all together and we were united in this thing, and we were all in different places with where he was at, but in the place that he was with God. And like that, it kind of takes my breath away, because I that was unreal. And we finished that, and it's kind of continued that way, where I'll sit and I'll have 3 hour long conversations with my family about God, about recovery from various sides of things. And about 2 years in, I did some Al-Anon stuff too. And so we talk about the Al-Anon side of things, and I can share openly about the addiction side of things. And they know I'm good. They know I'm safe. They know I'm all right, and like, I know they're all right. And what a gift that we can give each other. Um, but not to say that I've been like fucking awesome in sobriety the whole time. I I gotta hold myself accountable a little bit, because it's like, I don't know, like 4 months ago, I kind of I slipped out of AA for a bit, for like 2 months or something like that. Um, and it didn't like start as anything, um, as like an active, like, oh fuck AA, I hate AA, because I love AA. I've always really liked AA. But I didn't go to a meeting for a week, and I hadn't gone to a meeting for like 2 weeks, and then I hadn't gone for 3 weeks, and I hadn't gone for a month, and I hadn't gone for 2 months, and I was like, man, why am I so cranky all the time? Why am I like starting to be short with the people around me? Like, why do I feel like lying again? Why do I feel like going back into these patterns of thinking that don't represent the man I want to be, or represent the plans God has for me? Because I don't know what those are, but it's certainly not that. Um, and I was just sitting there, and I was like, oh, I called my first sponsor in Minnesota, and I was like, man, I'm having this time, and da da. And I was like on my high horse, and I was like, and he was like, when was the last time you went to a meeting? when when was the last time? And like, he was like, when was the last time you like made a gratitude list? When was the last time you like took some inventory at night? And I was like, quite a while, dog. I'm gonna be honest with you. He was like, all right, do that for like a while, and then call me back and tell me how you're feeling. And so I did that, and I called him back, and I was like, life's fucking great, dude. Like, I'm just moving. Things are sweet. And he was like, yeah, kind of thought that might be the case. Oh, but um, let's see here. And like, I'm not gonna say I'm also gonna hold myself accountable, because I didn't take every suggestion that was ever given to me either. But I took almost every suggestion that was ever given to me, and things have worked out pretty well. And the suggestions I didn't take always put me in some place of pain where I had to dig myself out of every single time. Where it was like, don't, let's see, like, don't date in your first year of sobriety. I was like, what, dude? Um, did that. It was a bad time. Ended up in some emotional hole, whatever. Had to dig myself out of that. And just like countless like small examples of like me being like, maybe I can bend the rules a little bit. And luckily I never bent them too far to where I went out, but I got myself in enough pain enough times to like realize that like the shit is for real. People told me to do these things for a reason, not because it's like some punitive thing, but because this has worked for so many people for years and years and years and years. And it continues to work for me, and it continues to work for a ton of other people too. Um, and at this point, like, I just feel so like up here right now. I just feel like immense gratitude, right? Because it's like, it's rooms like this that got me sober, that kept me sober. It's the tenets of the program that put me in the place I am now. And whenever I hear the promises, um, I can like go down a checklist and I can be like, yeah, 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 got that, got that, got that, got that. Except for like economic stuff, but at the same time, that's my fault, right? I can fully admit that's on me. I like I could like put my brain to it and probably get my finances straight. Um, but if you had read me when I heard the promises in early sobriety, I was like, no way is that going to be me. No way am I going to have those things. Particularly like the um, we will not regret the past, nor we wish to shut the door on it. I was like, shut that fucking door, get it closed. I'm done. I don't want to deal with it. Now it's like things with my past and everything. It's like my higher power has allowed those to be growing moments and learning moments and things that have allowed me to work through so many other things in my life that I thought were unrelated to those kind of like pivotal, really hard moments in my life, where I can take those into my day-to-day life today with the guidance of the program and start moving through things. So about all I have, but thanks for teaching me how to be who I am, and thanks for teaching me how to be a little bit of a grown up. Thanks for saving my life, y'all. Appreciate it.